The rain was falling hard over the glass towers of New York City that evening, turning the streets into shimmering reflections of headlights and hurried footsteps. And inside a luxury grocery store on Fifth Avenue, a 9-year-old boy stood completely still, clutching a small basket of bread and milk, as if it were the last piece of safety left in his world, whispering again and again under his breath, "Please don't take our food. My mom is sick." While his eyes searched the faces around him for mercy that seemed too far away to reach him, the store was warm, bright, and full of expensive silence, the kind where people pretend not to see struggle happening right in front of them. And yet everything changed the moment a tall man in a dark tailored coat turned toward the sound of that trembling voice. Ethan Carter, a single father and CEO of one of the largest logistics companies in the country. A man who had built his empire on discipline, numbers, and control, but had slowly learned that success did not protect a person from emptiness. He saw the boy first, then instinctively followed his gaze toward the entrance, where a woman sat weakly in a wheelchair near the sliding doors, soaked from the rain, wrapped in a thin blanket that looked far too light for the cold world around her. And in that instant, something in Ethan's expression changed. Not pity, not judgment, but recognition, as if the past had quietly walked into the present and stood waiting for him to respond. Security was already approaching, and the store manager leaned in to whisper that the boy had been trying to leave without paying, that they should handle it quickly. But Ethan lifted a hand and stopped them before another word could fall. His voice calm but firm as he said, "Wait." And then, without explaining anything further, he walked toward the boy. Every step echoed slightly on the polished floor. And when he finally stood in front of him, the boy took a small step back, holding the basket tighter, like it could shield him from consequences. But Ethan didn't raise his voice, didn't ask accusations. Instead, he simply crouched down, right there on the expensive marble floor, bringing himself to the boy's level, as if the world between them had suddenly disappeared, and softly asked, "What's your name?" "Nyand." The boy hesitated, swallowing fear before answering, "Noah," in a voice so quiet, it almost broke. His lips were trembling, and he kept glancing toward the entrance where his mother sat, as if afraid she might disappear if he looked away too long, and then he rushed the words out as if honesty might save him. "My mom. She hasn't eaten properly in days. I tried everywhere. I just wanted bread and milk. I didn't steal anything yet. I was going to ask, but they said we can't take without paying. I will pay you back when I grow up, I promise." Something cracked silently inside Ethan at those words, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply, like a door inside him unlocking that had been closed for years, because he remembered a version of himself he had buried. A boy standing outside a closed diner in winter, with his younger sister crying from hunger, while his mother pretended she had already eaten. For a moment, Ethan didn't speak. He just looked at Noah, then at the mother, then at the groceries trembling in the boy's arms, and then he stood up and said quietly to the cashier, "Everything they need, for 3 months, and include medicine." The room went still. The manager blinked in confusion and tried to explain policy, but Ethan's tone didn't rise. It simply became final. "It's handled." Within minutes, the basket turned into bags, and the bags turned into hope. Fresh food, warm meals, medicine packs, blankets added, without being asked. And when Noah finally realized the groceries were being given, not taken away, he didn't move at first, as if waiting for the world to correct itself, because life had never offered him something without taking something worse in return. When the cashier handed him the bags, Noah didn't accept them immediately. Instead, he looked at Ethan with disbelief, his eyes filling again, and whispered, "Why are you helping us?" Ethan paused, then replied softly, "Because someone should have helped you before it reached this point." Noah finally took the bags, but the moment he did, he turned and ran not away from gratitude, but toward his mother, as if afraid the miracle might vanish if he stopped believing in it even for a second. 2 days later, Ethan was in a boardroom overlooking Manhattan, surrounded by executives discussing contracts worth millions, when his assistant interrupted nervously and said, "Sir, there's someone outside. He won't leave." Ethan frowned, excused himself, and walked out expecting trouble. But instead he found Noah standing there again, holding a folded paper carefully with both hands, and behind him, his mother now seated more steadily in a borrowed wheelchair. Her face still tired but no longer fading, Noah stepped forward and said, "I came to return something," and handed Ethan the paper. It was a drawing childlike and imperfect, but deeply intentional. A small house, 3 figures holding hands, and written in uneven letters were the words, "Thank you for saving my mom." Ethan stared at it longer than he expected to, and before he could respond, the boy added something quieter, almost uncertain. "My mom said, we can't pay you back with money. But she said maybe you are lonely too." That sentence hit harder than anything in his entire career, because it was true in a way he had never admitted even to himself. He had wealth, influence, recognition. But at home, there were no footsteps except his own. No laughter in the kitchen, only silence pretending to be success. That evening, instead of returning to his penthouse, Ethan drove through the city until the glass buildings faded into older streets, narrower roads, dimmer lights, until he reached a small neighborhood where time seemed to move differently. Noah's home was modest, thin walls, worn furniture, a quiet kind of struggle that didn't ask for attention, but survived anyway. The mother, whose name was Clara, greeted him with tired politeness, apologizing for disturbing his time, but Ethan shook his head immediately and said, "No, I think I needed to come here more than you needed to apologize. Hi. Way." In the weeks that followed, something changed quietly but permanently. Ethan didn't arrive with cameras or announcements. He came with groceries, medical support, school fees paid silently, and conversations that didn't revolve around business but around life. Clara began treatment she had postponed for months. Noah returned to school, slowly rediscovering laughter, friendship, and the simple joy of being a child again. And Ethan, without realizing it at first, began staying longer each time, not because he was responsible, but because he felt something in that small home that no skyscraper had ever given him: presence. One evening, while sitting at their small kitchen table sharing simple tea, Noah asked him directly, "Do rich people ever feel sad?" And Ethan almost smiled at the honesty of it, then replied, "Yes, but they're not always good at admitting it." Clara, listening quietly, added, "Sometimes people don't need more money. They just need someone to see them." And in that moment, Ethan realized that everything he had built in his life had been about being seen by the world, but very little about truly seeing others. Months passed, and life did not become perfect, but it became better in ways that mattered. Clara's health improved, Noah's confidence returned, and Ethan quietly established a foundation called Second Chances. Not under his company's name, not for recognition, but for situations exactly like this. Families slipping through cracks that success often refuses to notice. Yet the real transformation was not external. It was internal, because Ethan began to understand that compassion was not an interruption to life. It was the meaning of it. The emotional climax came one winter morning, when Noah stood on a small school stage giving a speech about kindness. Ethan sat quietly in the back row, unnoticed, watching as the boy who once begged for bread now spoke about hope, about strangers who become lifelines, about how one moment of compassion can rewrite an entire future. And as applause filled the room, Noah's eyes briefly found Ethan's in the crowd, and he smiled. Not in gratitude alone, but in belonging. Later that day, Ethan walked alone through the cold city streets, thinking not about companies or numbers, but about a boy's trembling voice saying, "Please don't take our food," and how that moment had taken something from him too. His emotional distance, his isolation, his belief that success was separate from humanity. And in return, it had given him something far more valuable than anything he had ever earned: connection. And so the story that began with fear in a grocery store ended not with wealth or rescue, but with recognition. That sometimes the most powerful change does not come from those who have everything, but from those who choose to stop, to listen, and to care. Because in the end, kindness is not a transaction, and compassion is not charity. It is the quiet truth that no human being was ever meant to survive this world alone.